So we're delighted to be here in Bristol, holding, I think it's our first evidence session outside of Westminster, so really excited to be here. So first of all, please can I ask you to introduce yourselves for our record of proceedings, so perhaps if I start.
Hello, Karen Rose, I'm a Community Transport Advisor at Devon County Council.
Hello, I'm Jason Hum, I'm Head of Transport at West of England Combined Authority.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Ralph Ellis, Public Transport Officer, Plymouth City Council.
Derek Fishball, Senior Public Transport Officer, Devon County Council.
And you were all far better trained than I was, because you remembered to switch your microphones on. So if you can remember to do that when you're speaking, and the same for my colleagues, that would be great. So first of all, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I think obviously a lot of people have asked us today already in the media, you know, why have you come to Bristol? Why are you here in the west of England? And part of the reason is that in the majority of the areas that you represent, we're seeing increasing numbers of bus passenger journeys. And kind of wanted to know, first of all, really, how much control have you had over those general increases in passenger numbers? How much are they as a result of action that you've taken rather than population growth or other things outside your control? So, Tim, as the Combined Authority Mayor, would you like to start us off with what you think the answers are?
Of course, and thank you for welcome to the West of England. That's the important thing to say, first of all. I think what if I may is I'll try and just paint a little picture about the Combined Authority. I'm sure you are very familiar with them. I think some of you represent constituencies that are part of combined authorities, but I think from our perspective here in the West of England, that's the important starting place. And it's about how as councils we've come together to try and do things differently, to try and focus on the economic growth for the region, a very successful region, but a region in where we know as councils coming together there are many things that we have to work very hard on. Transport is really key to that. We are a very successful region. We are the only core city region that's a net contributor back to the Treasury. And consequently, our challenge as a combined authority is to ensure that the region continues to be in a position to succeed. And all of us are very, very clear about how we want to make sure that we're building inclusive growth as well into our agendas. So we're already seeing a lot of positives. Because of the devolution agenda, we're seeing millions of more additional pounds coming into the region through government and elsewhere. But for us today, it's around transport. And it's how buses play a really important role in how, as a region, we're going to address the future transport challenges. It's vital that we make sure our connectivity is improving all the time. It's vital that we are looking at a mix of different ways in which people move around the region. And to do that, we have to address it in a number of different ways. So it's really important that we have a plan for the future. Coming together as a combined authority, our role is to think strategically for the future. So that's why we are producing a regional transport plan, of which buses are a vital part. And within that regional transport plan are plans around new homes, new business sites, and how the region expands and grows are all part of it. So for us, as I say, this is a key element of our local bus strategy as part of our transport plan. You've touched already on growth in population, growth in economy, the success of our universities in attracting more students. So yes, numbers, population and potential users in the region has grown. But I think the really important thing is that it's a case of looking at how elements of investment have been made in the past that have resulted in a lot of the increase, and how then we as a combined authority can address that and continue that growth. So whilst we have had issues recently, and everybody in the combined authority, as with the rest of the councils, have been working closely with the operators, and we are holding them to account in those areas. we are also now seeing the results of significant investment that's come from the DFT, investment that's come from local authorities, from operators themselves, that have formed part of the Greater Bristol Bus Network. And that's seen some £80 million of additional investment into buses across the region.
So what do you think have been the significant measures that you've used that investment to fund that have led to the growth in bus passengers?
So as we say, within the Greater Bristol Bus Network, which was work that was already taking place beforehand, it's significant aspects around working with the operators who've been investing in new buses, in terms of how the local authorities, who are still the transport bodies, are looking at addressing bus measures within transport. Investment, and we'll touch on it later, I'm sure, in things like our metro bus system, which forms part of our new mass rapid transport systems. So there have been measures all the way through, from DFT direct funding at the top, through operators working together with local authorities. So I think the key has been the way in which those strategic partners have worked together to address different aspects. So we've seen investment in RTI, we've seen investment around routes, we're seeing investment from the operators in new buses themselves, and that's part of how we've been working together, and I think that's a really important aspect around everybody who's come together to see those increased numbers, which you say are bucking the national trends.
So Derek, looking at Devon, what's been the experience in Devon around bus passenger numbers, and what have been the significant things that you think have influenced people's propensity to travel by bus in the county?
As Tim has said, we've obviously experienced population growth, but we've also worked very hard with our main operators. We've got good working relationships with all our operators who have invested considerably in improving vehicles, improving reliability as much as they possibly can. We've used Section 106 funding from developments to enhance services to try and make sure that those new services are into new developments right from the start, so that people, if they move into a new housing estate, have got a service there from day one, or as near as possible. And we have seen, since about 2002, some 40% increase in passenger numbers. That is just started the last couple of years to level off somewhat, but maybe we couldn't sustain that growth forever. So I think it is a package of being able to work together. We've been very supported by our members who always support public transport, and we've done a lot to encourage people to use those facilities that are there.
Thank you. And Ralph, looking at Plymouth, what's been your experience in Plymouth? Is it similar to what we've heard from Devon and Bristol and the wider combined authority, or is it a bit different?
Yeah, patronage has been fairly steady the last 10 years, give or take a little bit each year. It's beginning to climb up a little bit more now. Again, I agree with Derek. We do enjoy good relationships with both Plymouth City Bus, part of the Go Ahead group, and Stagecoach Southwest, who moved into Plymouth in 2015. Both have invested lots of money in new vehicles. Very welcome. The City Council has worked with the operators. We meet on a regular basis. We've developed a joint ticketing, a multi-operator ticket called Skipper. We've invested in real-time information, and I think between us, it's looking very promising.
Okay. And can I ask all the members of the panel, really, I'm not sure who's best placed to answer this. We want to hear about local transport plans, how you incorporate buses, and how you prioritise spending on bus and other transport options. So can someone tell me a little bit about what you've done in your transport plans to tackle or to improve bus ridership? Who'd like to kick off? Jason, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Should I pick up on that?
Yeah.
So within West of England Combined Authority, we have a joint local transport plan. So been working for quite a considerable number of years jointly across not just the 3 unitary authorities within West of England, but also with North Somerset as well, because the interaction of the network and travel patterns basically stretches over a slightly wider area. For ourselves, bringing in a joint approach to the transport plan allows all of the forms of transport to be picked up, how they interact, but also how that interacts over the wider area. Our bus strategy is if you like, a key part of that jigsaw within the local transport plan, and then the bus strategy itself has sort of a wide number of facets to it, whether that's the whole network review and actually the network that we've got, and how we work with the operators, and whether how we lever the best value out of some of the partnerships that we've got, and what happens in terms of our revenue supported services and how that interacts in some of our community transport, the options for bringing some of that community transport into maybe local hubs, and not necessarily always relying on a typical bus network approach, if you like, and how we make use of some of our new technology as well, because we know that patterns in terms of transport are changing, and expectations in terms of people using the bus network are changing as well. Those elements that you've already heard in terms of infrastructure investment, so actually how that's built in, not only to learn from what we've done over previous years, but actually to make sure that that's integral in terms of our infrastructure plan for the next joint local transport plan. And again, that infrastructure plan not only has to pick up all transport modes, but actually has to have some key reflection in terms of what we want to try and prioritise for buses as well. Certainly in terms of the bus strategy being part of that joint local transport plan, what we measure and actually how we understand what our current performance is, and how we understand what our aspirations are, and actually how we're tracking that to see whether we're making a difference between the way we invest as well. So
what's the time frame for your transport plan? How many years does it cover?
It takes us up to 2036. So it quite rightly it's a long-term and visionary document, but also it has some key elements of implementation within there. They're in a lot shorter phase as well. And if we look at that next sort of 20-year period, we've got certain, if you like, transport travel habits, and we've got certain modes of transport that are, if you like, more embedded in the culture in terms of the way that people travel. But we're also recognising that's changing as well. So making sure not just the bus strategy, but our joint local transport plan actually accounts for how people's travel patterns will change, and actually what will look like in the future is all part of making sure those documents are fit for purpose.
So if there are people listening at home, and they'll have heard quite a lot of what will sound to them like jargon, I suspect, is if I'm the person sitting somewhere in the west of England thinking about what will transport look like in 20 years, can you kind of spell out in kind of, easy to understand language what they will expect, what they'll see their local authority or the combined authority doing, and what that will mean in terms of what transport in this part of the world looks like, and how they will know whether how will they know whether it's been successful? What are your goals that they can judge you against?
In the best approach to the question is to start the end and then work backwards. I think that element in terms of how we will know, certainly for the West of England area, it's about that continued growth and prosperity within the region. So actually the economic vitality of the region is really key. And clearly, the more people that want to live and work here, that's very positive, but also that brings with it some challenges in terms of how you best use that environment. So I think one of the key indicators, if you like, in terms of success is that continuing economic growth and prosperity, and getting the best for our communities, effectively. In terms of how you then begin to implement that, or how people will see their travel patterns changing, there is some elements of crystal ball gazing within that, but certainly what we know is that use of technology is really key for us. We do know that the actual levels of use on our network during peak hours is a challenge. We know that there are some constraints in terms of some elements of congestion within that. So if we look at traditionally people travelling at those peak hours and traditionally nationally travelling by car, there needs to be some changes within that partly will be led by the environment, because people's travel patterns will reflect the environment they're within, but also needs to be led within the approaches and the policies that we set as well. What that will look like, my own view, I suppose it's a question to me, so it's a personal view, is that ability to make better use of more mass transport is key, whether that's buses, that would be great, whether it's technology and how people car share, that'll be really key. Certainly some of the sustainability issues in terms of cycling and walking is going to be really key for us. Obviously, West of England's aspirations in terms of finding a mass rapid transit solution for the future is something that we would look at probably within the timescale for that plan. But certainly over the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be that use of traditional forms of transport that we're seeing at the moment, with maybe that integration of technology to make us use what we've got a lot more efficiently, supported by some of those infrastructure changes and those policy changes that we can help to guide some of those travel habits that we already know are changing.
So would it be fair to say that, that as a result of increasing congestion, rising population, air quality concerns, that you want to see fewer people driving, more people using other sort of options, whether it's walking and cycling, public transport of various sorts? Would that be right? Is that a shared view? Derek?
Yes, definitely. We have to bear in mind that we as an authority are responsible for not only buses, having a strategy for that, but walking, cycling, lorries, rail, even cars. So it is getting that balance. But as has been said, if we can move more people to using some form of mass transport system to relieve the congestion that is building all the time, that's got to be a positive move.
And does that mean carrot, stick, or a bit of both?
Probably a bit of both. We've got already things like bus lanes in our main sort of city, which is Exeter, but it is a historic city. It's hard to do certain things to the infrastructure, to the road network in places like that. We can't just flatten whole areas to improve road space, etc. But yeah, we have got air quality issues in certain areas, and we've also got congestion in smaller towns like Newton Abbot and Barnstaple, where it's even harder to address than in a big city, because bus frequencies and things don't tend to be so good.
And Ralph, when you're looking at Devon, not Devon, you're Plymouth, aren't you? Sorry. In Plymouth, are the challenges particularly acute there? Obviously, you're a city. Have you got air quality issues to address?
Yes, we do have air quality corridors, and I think the most important thing is that, road space is limited. Whilst we can increase road space to a certain extent, a lot of it will be limited, and it's making the most efficient use of that road space by encouraging people to mode shift to buses, cycling, walking. And I think the secret is, or the aim is, to try and make bus travel as attractive and as quick and as convenient, or more convenient, quicker than the car. That's the secret, is getting people out of cars.
And Karen, I know you've got responsibility for community transport. Where do you see this community transport fitting into the local transport plans?
Well, obviously, we do see it as part of the overall plan. It has a part to play. I think the way that we look at any solutions to providing transport is to be as modally agnostic as we can, really, and just try and find the best solution to meet whatever need there is. And we try to be consistent with our funding with whomever we're working with, be it commercial or community organisations, to ensure that the best service is provided that we can. In terms of our public transport support, we try to ensure that no community is left unserved. And whilst we have the level of funding that we do at the moment, that is our objective, that we are in that position where we ensure that no small village or community is without an option for some kind of transport.
Daniel.
Good afternoon. Can I just come back on that? Because no community left unserved can mean some kind of option once a week, once a day. It doesn't necessarily mean much on Sundays or shift workers, early evening, late evening. It's been a very rosy picture painted so far, but I have to say it doesn't correspond exactly with what people tell me is happening in much of the country. And I find it hard to believe Devon is that different. What's the actual reality been like for people in small villages, possibly even small market towns, let's say, on Sundays?
Yes, of course, challenging. And as you've said, it's not such a rosy picture, and particularly in deeper rural areas, it is a challenge where we are looking at things like just weekly bus services for market towns, and the same with community transport practitioners as well, that quite often it is ensuring that each village has a weekly service to get to essential shopping, backed up with other options such as voluntary car schemes to help people get to medical appointments at other times. We have a very good sector that do also provide more journeys at weekends particularly to help people get out and about for leisure reasons. We have experimented, we have put funding into supporting services to trial services for things like evening workers in remote rural areas. And we did this in Ilfracombe up on the North Devon coast, working with a community operator, and they were working with volunteer drivers to very late hours, and the service did help people into employment opportunities, but of course there is a very high cost attached to that per passenger usage.
I think one of the things we're aware is that Devon County Council and areas in the West of England Partnership were part of a total transport pilot, which obviously is trying to effectively get more bang for your buck by combining different sorts of transport. Can you tell us a bit about the total transport pilot, about what you tried out and whether it worked or didn't work, or what the lessons you learnt from that?
Well, the good news is the service is still operating. We started our pilot back in May 2016, and we provide a patient transport advice service. The main non-emergency ambulance provider is commissioned through the clinical commissioners, but all other transport is booked through ourselves in the Transport Coordination Service through our dynamic purchasing system, which is our tendering process. And basically, staff access eligibility for transport and book appropriate journeys via a bespoke booking system. So journeys are all booked through accredited providers. If a journey isn't eligible, then we can help with alternatives, suggesting public or community transport options there as well. I think one of the benefits to all parties has been that it's actually broadened the number of providers that are available. So it's given further scope for the operators and for the passengers and the NHS as well. But that service is still in operation.
And do you think that's a model that you could use more broadly? Is it the, I mean, in terms of thinking about, you know, transport to rural areas, is maybe a bus service that goes round absolutely everywhere once a week? Is that the way forward, or do you think this sort of more on-demand or demand-responsive model might be a better option? What's the lessons learned?
I think in terms of the passenger advice service, some lessons learned are that it does take a while to build up the partnership that is required to make things happen. The benefits are better planning, refining eligibility, as I mentioned, opening up a larger supplier basis, good financial management of those processes. The challenge is marrying up the different processes of different parties and managing expectation, which I think has been mentioned previously. At this stage, it's quite difficult to quantify any sort of financial benefits because there were challenges at the start with the quality and quantity of existing data. Sharing data has been an issue. I think perseverance is a big issue there. We've had a lot of different people come and go in that partnership, and it's about maintaining contacts with people that have the relevant information to make sure we can help that process go forward. As far as having a service which is responsive, I think the most important thing is to make sure that it's something that people can rely on. And if it's demand responsive, it has to be a service that people can be sure is actually going to be there at the times that they wish to travel, not a service that offers to be demand responsive but then isn't available when someone phones to make a booking. I think that's very important.
Does anybody else on the panel want to add to that point around total transport, or how you can better get, you link different sorts of services, whether it's transport to hospital or school transport with, bus services or dial-a-ride community transport?
Yeah, I think the issue, however you do it, is how much it actually costs. And to serve these very rural communities in any shape or form is costly. So we're always looking to serve them in the most cost-effective way we can, whether that is a bus, a taxi, a shared taxi, whatever, fare car. But it is costly in comparison to moving the larger numbers of people that you will always get in an urban environment.
Just moving on a little bit to issues around accessibility, and obviously there'll be some overlap with some of the people who would have been using some of the services we've been discussing. Obviously all buses have to be wheelchair accessible by 2020. There are other aspects of accessibility that aren't covered by that, such as audio-visual next stop information that obviously make buses more accessible possibly to everybody, actually, not just those with a visual or sensory impairment. What have you been doing to ensure that your buses and bus stops are accessible, and what are the sort of challenges that you've been facing as local authorities in doing that?
Yeah, we've gone to a new real-time provider, hopefully providing a much more reliable system that actually shows far more real-time than scheduled time. As far as other accessible vehicles are concerned, we have obviously in comparison to my colleagues from Devon, our dial-a-ride service is much smaller. But it's interesting the fact that Plymouth City Bus actually put a sum of money into the service to reflect the fact that conventional buses can't reach some of our parts of the estates, and obviously some parts of the estates which could be accessed would never be a viable service. So we acknowledge and we appreciate the fact that City Bus have put some money into the dial-a-ride service. So as a fallback, people will hopefully not be too isolated. That option is always there. Obviously, it's not the same flexibility as a normal bus service. It has to be booked in advance. And whilst people who want to travel on the service have to be eligible for a national concessionary pass in terms of age or disability, the pass is not valid on the service. You do have to pay a cash fare. But I'll say, in comparison to my colleagues from Devon, it's a small part of our business. Thank you.
Anything to add in terms of those issues around accessibility in its broadest sense, both for people, disabled people, or for people, who for other reasons might be excluded from transport?
Thank you very much, Chair. Initially, a lot of those aspects have traditionally sat with our councils. So as a combined authority, as we're becoming as we become having more influence in those areas, clearly they have to be part of the ways we're planning in terms of people being able to access both through the stops, making sure that the RTI that we've invested significantly in already is operational and functional, and that then links in with those other aspects around apps and all the other media that backs it up. So from our perspective, yes, we are investing in those things. That is an early part of our journey, but it will be really significant to everything we're doing. And also go back, if I may, in terms of that accessibility, and it's really around some of the things that Jason's touched on. As our strategy, a lot of that will be assessing actually what our networks look like. I think the most important thing is firstly that there's a service that's able to reach people who need to be able to use buses as ways to travel to work and to other essential services. So that'll be very much part of the network analysis that we're doing in the bus strategy. So absolutely endorse the fact that we need to make sure that our operators are investing in their fleets, that they're supporting both through their technology and the technology of the combined authority or the councils, how that backs up their RTI and the apps. But I think the other key is also actually a route network review to make sure that we are accessing people so they can then start using buses, but that might well be through new forms of connectivity, and we heard about it a little earlier. The way in which people are able to connect from different parts of the region to those main strategic routes that really will then give you genuine access across the region. So I think it's a mix. It's not just, if I may, in terms of accessibility around making sure that things are reaching both today's and tomorrow's standards of accessibility around wheelchairs and everything else, but making sure we're looking at how we can connect people to those routes.
Just on accessibility issues, I mean, we hear sometimes from small operators that it's harder for them economically to make the kind of adjustments that needed, the audiovisual changes and things. I mean, they will be required to by law at some point. But how confident are you that that if I went and spoke to people who've got mobility problems or poorly sighted across your areas, that they feel that the system is set up for them at the moment? I mean, there's some innovative things that are being done in some places around wheelchair access to buses and so on. Are you doing that? Are you confident that you're there with that?
I think, yeah, the whole fleet in Plymouth now is fully accessible. We have bus borders, raised curbs where we provided in the past. Though at the moment, the two main bus operators are very concerned if we put bus borders in, then we have to make sure that it's a very smooth run-in. In the past, where bus borders have been installed, there's been some near-side front damage to vehicles. So the operators, whilst they appreciate bus borders, they are very concerned that they go in the right place and at the right angle. We have very little AVR at the moment, and from the council's point of view, we will fully support AVR. Absolutely support it.
I'll just press you on that then. You say you've got very little. What can you do about it?
For buses, then we would fully support AVR. We're not in a position to, at the moment, I don't think we'd be in a position to help install it financially.
I think we've got some very real concerns with particularly our smaller operators with the cost of any additional equipment that is required. We've actually seen a big decrease in the number of operators in the Devon area. It's about halved in the last 40 years, which reflects obviously when we put tenders out, we've obviously got less people to go for them. And a lot of our operators are coming up to retiring age, their family businesses, and they've got no one to take it on. We've got operators who've had their businesses up for sale for quite some time, no takers. So the worst scenario is that any more additional costs that go into the business could tip them over the edge, and they'll take the easy option of just withdrawing and closing down. So that's a challenge that we need to bear in mind, particularly with our smaller operators. Also in rural areas, putting in things like bus borders is much more difficult. Often we're talking of roads that haven't even got footpaths, So it's not much good putting in a bus border because, you know, there's nowhere for anybody to go. So we do have to just bear all that in mind when we're looking at some of the deep rural areas that we're trying to serve. It's easy enough in towns and cities, but it is a different scenario in the rural areas.
Well, that kind of brings me on neatly to my next question, really, which is how easy to find and how useful is the current guidance around bus planning that's provided by the Department for Transport, and including its accessibility guidance? Does it reflect the needs of both rural and urban areas? And if not, what should be better? What should be different? Who wants to start off on that one? Jason?
If I may, Chair, I was just hoping just to pick up on the last point, if I could. Just a couple of things. We mentioned some really positive bits, but a couple of bits that we sort of hadn't said. That provision of information up front is really key to people that have accessibility challenges, and certainly that provision of information to them or to somebody who supports them, which can help give them that confidence to actually get on the bus in the first place is really key. That element about infrastructure upgrade, I think Ralph mentioned, but also your improvements in terms of working with your operators to actually improve the buses themselves. That can make a big difference. And probably the key one for me is driver training within there as well, because actually the support that a driver can give to any passengers, and it could be something simple that don't set off too early, actually wait for the person who's struggling with their mobility to actually be comfortable on their seat before they set off. And actually having consistent drivers on consistent routes as well isn't always possible, but particularly in some of the rural areas does make quite a big difference in terms of both the confidence and the comfort that people with mobility challenges can actually find when they get on buses. And I've now, forgotten the next question.
Yes,
apologies.
DFT
it was about the guidance. To what extent is the guidance useful, and is it right for both urban and rural areas, or are there sort of gaps in guidance or places where the guidance just doesn't actually fit with what your experience is?
I think they are quite different beasts to try and serve with similar guidance. I think is some of the challenges. And I guess the discussion that we've had in terms of those accessibility issues for rural areas is about how a bus service can best fit the needs of maybe isolated communities. Whereas when you're in heavily populated or densely populated urban areas, and those elements that we spoke of initially in terms of congestion is about how you can use a bus network in terms of moving as many people quickly and efficiently from point A to point B. And I think there's a disconnect between those two elements in the best guidance. You would use your efficiencies in terms of how you get your network operating as good as possible, and therefore the financial stability that could bring to potentially then cross-populate to some of your accessibility issues. And I don't necessarily think that's picked up well enough in the guidance at present.
Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Just to say, I think it is somewhat different in an urban and a rural area, and yeah, perhaps the guidance quite naturally is often more geared to the heavy urban areas.
Sort of final question from me for a little bit, which is one of the things that's been noted is that whilst the government have a rail strategy, an aviation strategy, even a cycling and walking strategy, there isn't at the moment a bus strategy or framework from central government. Do you think that would be a positive? And if so, what would you want to see included in a central government bus strategy? Who'd like to go? Ralph, you look like you're dying to jump in. Tell us.
Yeah, obviously it would have to cover a lot of things: air quality, congestion, demand management. We're currently talking to a major employer in Plymouth about charging to park, and maybe then using that money to support local bus services into the area concerned. that would be a start for us. I know it's follow on from Nottingham and other places, but that would certainly be an interesting development from Plymouth. Congestion charging, certainly I don't think there's no appetite for that at the moment in Plymouth, but it could be something in the future, and obviously that would be a major issue.
Do you think that central government should play more of a role in perhaps making those things more easier to do at a local level? Because I recognise that they're politically it's very difficult to do any sort of road charging or.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, you take the example of Manchester. I mean, you know, simplistically, no one's going to vote for being charged to use the roads that they've always used for free in the past. So the challenge is, how do we get around that? You know, how do we get a congestion charge if it's felt necessary?
Okay, who else would like to tell me what should be in a bus strategy from central government?
And that change that Ralph has just said can only come by improving public transport to such a level that it is a very attractive alternative to what people are currently doing. And that is the challenge, both politically and for operators, etc., to do.
And as a council, what would help you to? What would you look to central government to do that might help you to shape your bus strategy and achieve that sort of modal shift that you're looking for?
Perhaps some more definite sort of guidance on restricting road use, whether that be single occupancy vehicles, etc. As Ralph has said, workplace charging may be a possibility, and just perhaps centrally strengthening some of these issues so that they are easier to implement in areas like Devon.
Tim, how do you see these issues of sort of the chicken and the egg, really? If you don't have the money to invest in public transport, how do you make the public transport good enough to lure people out of their cars?
You've almost led me into what would be the core of my answer, Chair, but I say this around a number of challenges that people ask me around, and it's really about being very, very clear at central government about who has the levers and the tools to make a difference. And at the moment, in this area and a lot of other public transport areas, I think within government, and I think it's been that case for a long time, there are a lot of different departments, all of whom have different aspects and different elements of those tools and levers. Ultimately, it's going to be about how funding is also supported and devolved. So there's a question there, accepting, of course, that there are different models around the UK in terms of local government. So if we put those little things to one side at the moment, if we think about it, clearly DFT are recognised, but CLG, health, buses and public transport fit in lots of different areas. So it's how within government we can get government to be looking at this collectively. And by the way, I don't say this exclusively about public transport and buses. I say it in lots of other areas that affect us. So I think that's the really important thing. It's government understanding, central government understanding what their role would be, how the funding would become available, how that funding would be devolved and who those decision makers there are, but also how each of the departments within government can come together to make sure that this is a joined up piece of strategy that's coming out of Westminster and Whitehall.
Okay. And how do you see that happening, or what else would you like to add? I mean, I think that's a really important point, is, of course, if you can tackle social isolation or loneliness, sometimes providing transport might be in one budget, but the savings might be in a completely different budget, one which isn't devolved to the local area. What do you think that's properly recognised? Are there things that government could do to enable you to better understand the way in which costs and savings fall in different places and outside different silos?
I think a major challenge for the operators and for the councils is the English National Concessionary Pass system, which does give free travel for certain categories. That becomes a huge part of some of the operators' total revenue is based on that. It does then present a budget challenge to the local authorities. Where do we go with this? A lot of our two main operators, it's a huge part of their revenue over which they've got no control. They have to give free travel, we have to pay for it, and it's not reflecting their increased costs. And there's always a danger then that you get these, I know it's not so much in Plymouth, but you do hear these stories of buses running around full up, but they're losing money because no one's paying a fare. I think that's certainly a challenge in some of the smaller towns, perhaps. Obviously, hopefully not in Plymouth, but it is a challenge.
Yeah, and obviously there's a value to that, but perhaps isn't captured in those costs in terms of keeping people independent. And,
it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line, someone's got to pay for that bus fare.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, I think you wanted to add something on what should or shouldn't be in it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that element that I think everybody's touched on, but that long-term stability in terms of investment and planning, I think is really key. Of course, it depends what goes into a strategy, but if there is some help around how we can get more confident in terms of approaches going forward, funding going forward, I think that certainly helps. That allows you to mix that investment approach into your planning and your housing strategies and into your local transport strategies as well. So certainly a longer term view, which I think is probably lacking because we don't have a national bus strategy, I think is really key. Giving a steer in terms of how to prioritise or incentivise investment in bus measures, I think is probably missing and could be picked up in a strategy as well. Certainly, current appraisal current prioritisation work, appraisal frameworks that DFT operate at the moment don't necessarily reflect bus priority schemes particularly well. There's quite a heavy emphasis in terms of impact on car journey times, and again, I think that isn't necessarily in balance in terms of some of the previous answers and where we need to get to. I think the ability to learn from other people and have it as a central source for some good practice, and whether that is around some of the innovation that we've talked about, or some of those smart ticketing solutions, I think is lacking without a central coordinated strategy as well. That's probably what I thought would be in the strategy. Thank you.
I think that was quite a good list there of some of the things that you'd want to see. I think now we're going to move. We've already started touching and talking about some of the factors that affect bus use, but we're going to look at that in a bit more detail now. I'm going to hand over to Graham for this section.
Thanks, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Some of the ground you've already covered because you've given really full answers to the earlier questions, but there's just a couple of things I'd like to clarify. As we've heard, nationally we lack a bus strategy, although we have a strategy for rail and a strategy for air travel. Just in relation to, perhaps I'll start with Jason, the answers you gave earlier about the transport plans for the West of England. Did I hear you right there? Is there a specific strategy for buses within that overall plan? There is, and that's been published and so on, and is and that plan's been published and so on.
Yes, thank you. We're actually out to consultation with our joint local transport plan, of which the bus strategy is part, actually in January of next year. So yes, it's included. No, we're not out in terms of consultation yet.
I appreciate that. In terms of what the committee's about, when we were travelling here today, the press were kind of raising all sorts of issues with us about what advice you're going to give to the mayor and, you know, what are you going to tell the bus operators and so on. But essentially what we're here to do is to listen to your experience of what's worked and what hasn't worked, and to identify what positive things, because you've booked the national trend here, and I know that there are a number of factors at play, but what positive factors that we can see in Bristol that we can apply elsewhere, and what practical issues that you've experienced that are problematic. So just in terms of some of the earlier things you said about measures that have been taken to actively encourage people to choose to move onto buses and away from cars, you know, we've heard about bus lanes, and I think Ralph or Derek talked about making better use of existing road space. What about, in terms of the reasons for that shift? What about data sharing? You've touched on that as well, Jason, and is that something that we could do more of? You know, you have one dominant operator here in Bristol. We've had evidence from the first group. We see a different regulatory framework in London and a much broader spread of the available data. Is that something that we could learn some lessons from?
Thank you. Yes, I think understanding your data and your travel patterns is really key. Understanding the customer and what the customer need is quite critical as well. In terms of the data that you touched on, the strength of the relationship with your operators, or certainly your key operator, is quite critical to that. And certainly the ability within the guidance to enter into some kind of partnership with a varying degree of formality, I guess, is what local authorities, and certainly us in the west of England, have been doing for a number of years anyway. That allows you to share that information between local authority and an operator, and fundamentally both aspirations are quite well aligned in terms of what each party wants to achieve. Making sure the data is shared is quite key to that. Where the legislation is a little bit light, and I'm sure we'll come on to franchising at some point, is around truly understanding an operator's challenges and costs, and certainly that then begins to reflect into a combined authority or local authority's ability to then to provide revenue support for supported services. So I think whilst the need to share data is critical, that is reflected by the strength of the relationship with the operator. Actually, some of the finances that underpin that, to truly understand how effective some of the changes are, it is probably a little bit light in terms of the legislation, unless you were to go down the franchising route. There are some challenges around a franchising route, as I'm sure you'll be aware. But that is a bit of a gap in terms of the available information that isn't able to be shared at present.
I'm grateful. I think we're going to come on to that a little bit later, aren't we, under franchising? Because in the west of England, you've got that option, which isn't necessarily open to other areas outside of London. But just in relation to this particular section about the factors that are affecting bus use and the practical things that local authorities can do, in terms of, you know, what the local authority areas are doing to improve the reliability of bus services and also to tackle congestion, you know, specific examples. And I do understand there's enormous pressure on local government budgets due to central government cuts, but you know, specifically, what are you doing to improve the reliability of bus services and to tackle congestion? Is there, Jason? Do you wish to start? Thanks.
Thank you. Absolutely correct. Reliability, punctuality, confidence around journey times, as well as issues around fares and quality are really key to customer. In terms of the practical steps that we've been taking thus far is around actually that joint approach with the operator. So, okay, what can they invest in terms of their fleet? What can we invest and ourselves and the unitary authorities in terms of infrastructure changes on street. And again, they can fall into two aspects. One is around changes to road space or potential reallocation of road space, which does have its challenges in terms of support for communities, but again allows the physical environment through which the bus is travelling to become more efficient. That then helps with that punctuality and confidence, and therefore has helped us improve some of those passenger numbers. Certainly the speed of travel is also influenced by how people board onto a bus as well, so that time taken to pay the driver, find the change, work out which stop you're going to is, again, we've done some really good work around off-bus ticketing, smart ticketing, travel cards, which has been really positive. So again, that allows your bus to reduce its dwell time at stops, reducing that obviously speeds the bus time in relative as a comparator in relation to vehicle times. And the other element in terms of then the environment of there's how quickly the bus can travel through its environment. It's actually the environment within which the passenger is waiting as well. So that provision of information in terms of real-time information, we've got I think about 900 units out across the West of England region, which is really positive. Actually, are there enough bus shelters? Are they long enough? If you're increasing your patronage, actually are people stood and waiting in the rain? Actually, have you analysed your stops that you're upping the frequency on some of your key routes that are within an acceptable walking distance from where the majority of your communities are based? And so we've looked at a huge amount of that. I think they're good carrots. There are also some, I wouldn't necessarily call them sticks, there are some legislative controls that already exist. We can already enforce parking restrictions. So actually, if people are parking where they shouldn't be, how do we prioritise that along some of our key routes? Again, that moves that congestion out of the way and allows the free-flowing movement of traffic. Enforcement of bus lanes and bus gates, again, is an element that unitary authorities have the power to enforce, and again is a complementary approach. Where your resident parking zones are, how far out they stretch. Certainly over the last couple of years, across our area, we've done some really positive work in reducing the impact on those communities, but also therefore encouraging people to not drive and park in the nearest residential area and then walk, but actually use the bus. And then elements in terms of, okay, what's the future for powers within the Traffic Management Act as well? So actually, do we need some of those further that would help control?
I wanted to ask about that. I wonder if I might ask Tim, because we've had written... Sorry, can you hear me? We've had some written evidence, and we've had some briefings about the Greater Bristol bus network and the influence that had on 10 key routes across the city. It was an £80 million investment beginning in 2008. But that issue about the Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act, when the committee's consistently supported that before I was a member of it and continues to, but in response the Minister says that local authorities don't want these powers. Is that true? Please. Yeah.
I haven't heard that mentioned in any of my conversations with the Minister. I'm coming up with a politician's answer, as you can get. The GBBN, Greater Bristol Bus Network, you're absolutely right, £80 million, and as I touched on earlier, that is a mix of DFT of the operator, the main operator first, but also then the local authorities, both direct funding but also contributions from developers around 106 monies. So that's really important. I mean, it has been vital. It's seen 120 new buses. The pot Jason's talked about in terms of investment in those bus stops and shelters, I think is a really important part about usage. Real-time info, we've touched on that. So those are all parts that feed into it. But, and I was scribbling a note to myself earlier around this, is the the highways authority functions still sit with the local authorities. So it is important, and that's part of our relationship that we as a combined authority, once we have more powers in place, will be working on, is how we tie in how we do that enforcement aspect, how we can make those green routes work more effectively, how we can look at how the lanes interact and really make some differences. So a lot of work was done under the GBBN aspect, and it was a really good start. But if you like, it's that piece we've got to carry forward. So some of those aspects you've just touched on, if we are to genuinely be able to work regionally across that piece, yes, I do think we need more powers in that space. So, sorry. So specifically, Tim, in relation to the context of the West of England, do you think that the government should enact Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act? This is where I'm going to look to Jason, because please excuse the fact I can't tell you what Part 6 says verbatim. The principle that you outlined to me earlier. Yeah. Disregarding traffic regulations, so right turns at junctions, disregarding box junction markings and so on. Things that speed the traffic. As colleagues here are so keen to pick it up, may I?
I'm just conscious that we are kind of 25 minutes from the end of our session. We've got loads we want to hear. So a really brief and succinct answers would be much appreciated. So if the answer is yes, we want those powers, just say yeah.
Yes, Plymouth does want those powers, especially in relation to box junctions. Thank you.
If I might, Chair, yes, and as a combined authority, the ability for the combined authority to run with those as well will help that central coordination.
And in Devon, we took the matter to Cabinet in the summer, but there wasn't considered to be a network management problem with moving traffic in things like bus lanes. It was more an issue about civil parking enforcement for parking in bus lanes. So at the moment, no problem has really been identified either by ourselves or by our local bus companies, except for the parking issue.
Oh, sorry. Keep forgetting pressing the button. In relation to the DFT guidance from 1997 for bus priority measures, what's your view in there on the guidance in terms of how useful it's been to assist the smooth flow of traffic to address congestion and improve the efficiency of the buses?
Should I start on that one? I think it's a useful document, but it's now 20 years old and things have moved on a fair bit. Some of the key principles in terms of steps that you might take to prioritise buses is still relevant. However, things that we've probably already covered today, those elements around technology, ticketing, smart cards, apps, contactless payments, are not picked up within the guidance. It doesn't really link that well in terms of interchange between routes and also complementary modes. So again, I think we've learnt more on that over the last 20 years than we had done previously. We just talked about enforcement and powers within the Traffic Management Act. Again, it's lacking from there. So actually, how that is embedded within a guidance note would be really key. Those changes around partnership and franchising, again, have moved on massively in terms of where we were in 1997. Financial pressures in the environment are considerably different as well, particularly around the revenue support of some of those proposals. So whilst you may have the capital to implement some of the steps that are maybe suggested in the guidance, actually and that's the landscape for that is massively different than it was in 1997. And those elements around patronage, best practice, in some instances actually removing bus priority measures to get a better flow for the network, which allows the bus to get to where it needs to be quicker, again, as changes that we've probably learned over the last 20 years. So yes, I think an update is valid, and yes, I think things have moved on.
Okay. Derek and Ralph, do you concur with that? Have you got a view?
Yes, in general terms. I think, as I said earlier, we've got a responsibility for all modes of transport, not just buses, and it is getting a balance. But from our point of view, we want to see anything that helps buses be implemented as much as possible.
I'm just going to be very quick, and this is my last question, Chair, and it's to Karen really, and it's a subject we've already talked about very briefly, and it's something that's been raised with the committee by passengers, and that's the availability of bus information to service users, particularly the deficiencies of online in-time timetable changes, but the availability of printed timetables, particularly at bus stops and for passengers, especially disabled and elderly passengers that request it. What's your view on that?
Certainly as an authority, we've continued to produce bus information in a printed format as well as information online. We have something we call our Travel Devon website, which collects together information on walking, cycling, buses and trains, and offers things like trail maps, e-timetables, interactive bus map as well as ticket information, and includes things like travel tips for people who may be less used to using those various modes of travel. So for us, it's been important to continue to provide printed information for those less able to use online information, but to complement that with information at the bus stop, online, and to be able for people to have in their hand as well.
I think our main commercial operator is very good at producing printed timetables at bus stops, and where they're supported services, we try and do the same from a council point of view. So, as Karen said, there is a range of information there from websites, whether it's our own, the main bus operators, the South West PTI information system, real-time information at the main stops in towns. There's a pretty good mix of information available to the public.
Can you make directions to the operator or strongly suggest that the operator does this? I mean, obviously there are some circumstances when you can't comply, but as a matter of course that they seek to do it.
Yeah, as I said, we've got good, very good working relationship with our main commercial operator in the area, which is Stagecoach. We have regular meetings with them. These sort of issues are discussed, and jointly plans are worked out to improve things wherever we can.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up really to Graham's question? So if I came on a train to Plymouth and jumped off at the railway station and went to the nearest bus stop, would I be able to see what the bus network in Plymouth looks like, irrespective of operator? Would I know where, when I could expect a bus to get me to wherever I was hoping to go?
Yes, you can. Yeah, there's 3 bus stops adjacent to the railway station, and they've all got timetables. One's got real-time information, the outbound services. They've got shelters. Shelters are provided by an outside contractor called JC & Co. Apart from the shelters, the City Council provides the bus stops, the cases, the timetable cases. The bus operators fill those cases with their timetables. If there's more than one operator, then we provide 2 cases so they don't clash with each other. And both operators, both Stagecoach and Plymouth City Bus, do produce written hard copy timetables for their own services and for those that they operate on my behalf, commercial and subsidised services, proper printed timetables. And we provide an online map.
And do you think, for each of you, and very, very briefly, is it if you were a visitor to one of your cities or towns, is it easy to use the bus? Is it good enough?
Yes.
Yes, I think so. Yes, and we do get a lot of compliments from visitors as to how good the services are and the information available.
Yes, but I think there's always more that we can do, and that provision of information is really critical. And we know, based on the percentage uses of buses, it's not as high as it could be. So we're doing okay, but we can do better.
I think we've only got 15 minutes left to go, but some really important issues that I'm going to turn to Daniel to ask you some questions about. One is about the relationship between transport and planning, and also, as you might have anticipated, is we want to talk about the place of franchising and other powers. Daniel.
We'll go quickly, but I want to say, I'm astonished to hear you say you think that it's easy for people visiting places to use buses. That is not my experience anywhere, and I just don't think it's like that, frankly. If you put yourself in the position of the visitor going to places. Anyway, planner. I know none of you are planners, but Jason did touch on this earlier, the relationship between getting the right transport infrastructure and particularly new housing and industrial developments. It's a simple question, really. Do you think you are sufficiently joined up? And I mean, you're in complicated local governance structures with multi-tier local government. Do you think it's sufficiently joined up to produce the right kind of outcome at the moment? Who would like to start?
May I jump in? We touched earlier on about the joint working as a region. We touched earlier on about how we have been working as a region in the past, and our role now as a combined authority is to take that on and move that forward. Part of that work has been around our spatial plan, which is identifying residential and business opportunities over the next 20 years. But we have made sure, and it's critical, that that is being supported by the joint transport plan that we're talking about. So that is addressing different mode options to our new developments. And that is vitally important from our perspective, and it has got to be addressing various different modes. So from our perspective, on a regional strategic basis, yes, we are. And I know that the local authorities who are behind that, as well, who are the planning authorities, see that as a really vital aspect of how we see those developments coming forward. So that's a very quick answer, but if I could have just 2 seconds on your earlier one, yes, I do think we have to do better in terms of information. You touched on visitors. I mean, we have a very, very vibrant visitor and tourism economy here in the region, so it is vital, right, that we are constantly able to keep addressing what those needs need to be. And that for us is really important. So yeah, my answer earlier is whatever we've got, it's never good enough. We've got to do better in that information.
It's not a criticism of you, it's the same everywhere in my
No,
experience.
I just wanted to make that point is, yes, we're not complacent. Thank you.
Any others on the, I mean, again, are you confident that we're not going to get more developments where basically we get housing developments without the transport?
I think what we're starting to find is that the 106 money is the developers are desperately trying to reduce the amount they want to contribute,
yep.
Particularly as the financial situation has got more difficult. And that 106 money is also being competed against, not just for perhaps the bus service, but for new roundabout and road infrastructure to that development. So it has got its challenges, but we do work very closely with our planning people, and we are involved usually from a very early stage.
Can you tell them not to do it if the transport isn't good enough? Can you?
We can suggest, but...
I thought so, yeah. Ralph?
Yeah, our planning team is on the same floor as us at the City Council, so they do keep in contact with us. Where there are something which is we think is going to be of interest, of concern to the operators, then we have the Plymouth Bus Punctuality Improvement Partnership, the BPIP, and we take that to the operators and seek their views, concerns, etc. I mean, talk about 106. We've just started a new service in Sherford Newtown, and we've been able to work with Stagecoach, and we've gone into given these a new estate a service every 20 minutes. Again, which we talked about earlier on, was the chicken and egg situation. In this case, it's worked. We've been able to use the 106 money to provide a service into a new town, which a very small number of people there at the moment, but they've got a bus every 20 minutes, Monday to Saturday, hourly, evenings and Sundays, which
very good.
I think is very good.
Yeah.
So if people go into Sherford Newtown, they can't say they haven't got a bus service. There it is, every 20 minutes.
You'll be aware the Bus Services Act of last year created some new powers. This is a question for Tim, really. Have you looked at franchising? Have you considered it?
The key here is our bus strategy. So our bus strategy will actually inform what we see as the future and the way in which bus services will develop, and will integrate then with other services across the region. So from our perspective, we will use the bus strategy to form what those networks need to look like, how those operations need to come into place. What we then look at in terms of how that operation will take place will then fall on the back of that. So I'm really interested to explore lots of options. We've got quality partnerships that we're rolling out and we've got in operation as well. So from our perspective, it's really important that we investigate all of the options and find the right options for what we need to see developing. So not saying we're ruling that out, but we need to make sure we're looking at it properly in context to the overall strategy and how that could fit as part of any quality partnerships.
Is there anything you think that franchising could give you that you haven't got at the moment?
Again, I think it's really important to look at what we need. When we look at the models, I mean, as lots of people tell me anecdotally, if we take London out of the equation, there isn't another city or city region in the country where it's been successful. I don't therefore eliminate it purely on that anecdotal aspect. It's a case of actually really looking about what we would need to have within those partnership arrangements. And that's why we want to look at what we would call quality partnerships, and how we then use a vehicle to deliver that would be that next question.
We'll go on to partnerships in a second. Obviously, there aren't any other examples because no one else has yet managed to do it elsewhere in the country. But for instance, supposing you wanted to ensure evening services, early services, weekend services, which the operator chose for commercial reasons not to do, how could you do that if it wasn't going to be through franchising?
Well, again, that goes back to the nature of the partnership that you've got in place. So we're already looking at that and working on those sort of models with our other mass rapid transport system around Metro Bus. So there are ways in which we could look at doing it, but you're right, it's looking at what we need as a region, and that's the fundamental aspect of it. It's doing that process and that research and that work first, and then finding the vehicle to deliver.
So could you tell us a bit about the partnerships that you've got and what you think the strengths are?
Okay. Have you got more info
Jason,
on the Metro Bus? I
Yeah,
mean,
I can.
only on the basis of more info, but it's based around our Metro Bus arrangements.
If you can be as succinct as possible,
Okay.
that would be great.
Succinct as possible. The gap that you spoke about is around data and the viability of a particular route or a particular extension, as you mentioned, into the evening, and where your people are travelling. So that's the gap that you think you said, what would franchising give you? It would give you those elements, and they are quite critical in terms of planning your strategy. In terms of the relationships that we've got with First Bus, they're very positive, and we work jointly on investment in the network, as I've said, investment in their fleet. There's always early discussions in terms of the routes that are doing really well and the routes that are struggling a little bit. Some of the timescales in terms of where a route is cancelled are tight and difficult to cope with. But certainly our early involvement with the operator helps to mitigate any risks associated with that.
The Metro Bus route's being built, and I think I was standing on a bit of road which is now finished but doesn't have a bus route on it because the operator, you can't find an operator to commercially run it. Isn't that exactly the problem? What can you do about that under the current system with a partnership approach?
It is a challenge because again there's not a bus there, and for every example that we've got of a difficult situation like that, we've got lots of positives in terms of where we've really worked well on that partnership, and we've been able to get bus numbers and flying in terms of the increases that we've seen. So you're absolutely right. What franchising would allow you to do is to specify, if you're doing a significant investment in capital infrastructure, franchising would be able to guarantee that a route will go down that particular.
It's a strange situation, isn't it, where you get public money being put into a piece of infrastructure, and then you've actually got a situation where you can't actually run a service on it under the current situation.
I absolutely accept that that isn't an ideal situation. No, thank you. What we also know is franchising is relatively new in terms of that legislation. It's not been enacted yet. There is some cautiousness to make sure that what's looked into is going to be viable for each region. And certainly we are part of the Urban Transport Group. We're also part of the 8 combined authorities, and we do share a lot of transport information between us around those elements of best practice, where we might want to move to, and also some of the challenges and risks that are involved with a major decision in terms of what a combined authority would be taking on. We recognise it's good legislation, it gives that option, but exactly how we use it to the best benefit, I think, as Mayor Bowles said, is something that we're trying to do some work on through our bus strategy.
Derek, how useful have the partnership approaches been for both of you?
Yeah, as I said, we work well with our operators. Additional journeys can always be purchased through our tendering system, but it's all back to having the funding to be able to do that.
Have you got much money left to do it?
Never got enough.
Pride's gone off a cliff nationally.
Yes.
We've got whole swathes of the country where now there is no support going in at all.
No, and as I said earlier, we've been very well supported by our members. We're still currently supporting about £7 million worth of services. About 1 million of that is from 106 money. So there is still considerable money going in. But in rural areas, as I said, the cost is quite exorbitant, really.
And how about Plymouth?
Yeah, I mean, our supported services budget has remained fairly constant over the years. Obviously, nowhere near the same as Derek's at Devon. Ours is roughly about £1/3 Each time we go for a round of tendering, obviously, the money remains the same, but it buys a little less each time. We've been very fortunate over the years that with Sunday trading, in the past, the City Council used to support quite a network of Sunday buses. Now they're all commercial now, Sunday daytime's commercial. We don't support anything at all on Sunday now. Our main supported services now are basically Monday to Friday, between 9:30 and sort of 6 o'clock, with 1 or 2 exceptions. I mean, whether, you know, if we wanted more Sunday buses, we wanted more evening buses, I'm sure either City Bus or Stagecoach would be only too happy to quote, but it's as Derek said, it's having the money. Whether it's partnership, franchising or anything.
Well, tendering's one, and supporting non-commercial services is one thing. Quality partnerships is another, obviously designed to try and come to a deal with private operators to improve services. Do you use those?
No, ours is pure and informal partnerships.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're kind of nearing the end now, so you can sort of relax a little bit. One of the issues that we've just started touching on, of course, is funding, and that's pretty key. One of the impacts of that is on the ability of authorities, well, partly to get funding, but also to make use of it. In written evidence, we heard from Telford and Wrekin Council, and they told us that they don't have the capital or the revenue funding resources available to bring forward investment, innovation and best practice in the bus network. Is that something you recognise? What impact you've already heard the impact funding cuts have had perhaps on supported services, but what impact have funding cuts had on your transport planning functions and your ability to bid and spend the resources that are available? Derek?
In the last 5 or 6 years, we've had 2 rounds of service reductions due to funding cutbacks. We haven't done anything for the last 3 years. We've managed to hold it fairly steady, but it does have obviously an effect, and we have lost services, we've lost frequencies, particularly in the more rural areas because of a lack of funding. So yeah, the funding reduction from central government has had that impact on bus services in Devon.
Karen, is there anything you want to add from your perspective around the impact of budget cuts?
Well, likewise, we've tried to maintain our existing grant support for community transport. And I guess, obviously, the biggest pressure on schemes at the moment is the uncertainty regarding the legislative changes with the EU regulations. In the meantime, we've managed to maintain support for services, but that's our biggest challenge at the moment, is what happens beyond where we are at the moment.
Yes, and I'm sure you know that was the subject of our first inquiry of the Select Committee. Ralph, what's the position in Plymouth around the impact of cuts to local authority funding?
Well, we've had some successes with major schemes. Our strategic or major planning teams have delivered one or two really big schemes lately. The Derriford Transport Scheme, they're working on the Forder Valley Link Road Scheme. They delivered the East End Scheme back in 2010. So in regards to capital projects, we've been very successful, and I think as my submission, we've been successful with the Transforming Cities funds. We're hopefully one of the 10 successful authorities, where there's up to £100 million at stake. So fingers crossed we'll be successful there. As I said, as regards revenue with the tendered services, it's remained fairly constant. It buys a little bit less each time, but we've managed to prioritise Monday to Friday services aimed at schools, doctors, hospitals, and I think it's met what it should be meeting. We could do more. We lost all our Saturday services back in 2009, 2010. We lost all our Saturday services when the budget was cut last time, but since then it's remained fairly constant. We've lost a few early mornings, a few late nights, late evening, but on the whole it's remained. We've been able to maintain the network, and the last network round of tendering, we had a very good response from both City Bus and Stagecoach, and we were able to actually increase the network based on the response we had from Stagecoach. We've gone into a couple of new estates.
Right, Tim, I'm going to give you the last word on this. Obviously, as a Metro Mayor, perhaps you're in a slightly better position than many local transport authorities. Have you got the people to use that money wisely when it's been allocated to the area?
I think we'll go back if we may, to the start on it, and I'll come on to that. I touched on it a little earlier about having those tools and levers, and clearly as a combined authority, one of the things we have is a small amount of revenue and capital direct gain share, as it's referred to. So we will look at ways in which we can use elements of that, bearing in mind, of course, we have many other calls on that funding. But I think the other important aspect for us and the way we're working as a region is our relationship with our LEP, because within that there are various different funding streams around LGF and so on, and that they have been major contributors to a lot of that capital work that's gone on. And I know we will be keeping focusing, as we're part of, we are the operational aspect of the LEP, we'll be keeping to working within that. Ralph's touched on Transforming Cities funds. Again, as a combined authority, we have seen an awful lot of investment come into the region on that. Our Transforming Cities fund will be used around delivering parts of that joint transport plan. So yes, we will be looking at how we can use some elements of that around bus services. So we see it as quite a significant mix. I think the other thing, and we've touched on it earlier, is how then the relationship works with the local authorities, who are the planning authorities, around 106, SIL and those other things. So I think the really important thing is that we're working as a region to identify those different streams and trying to work how we build that funding around that, making sure we're working across those, all of those, both borders, but those funding streams.
I'm afraid time has defeated us. It's amazing how quickly an hour and a half can pass by when we're talking buses. I'm sure there's much more information that we would and more questions we'd like to have asked, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So we may write to you with requests for further information if we feel there are bits that we've missed. But thank you very much for giving evidence today, and that concludes our public session. Order, order. Yeah, so if people could clear the room, because we need to set it up ready for the public session that we're doing at 4 o'clock.